The value is in the protocols. Glenn Hutchins.
Welcome to the DeFi Standard, and this is Mickey B Fresh. The opportunity for us to be a part of that from the beginning is even bigger now because there's more use cases for FLR as collateral, and especially when the F asset and minting goes live, which it will soon. So this is all accumulation phase, and it's not inflationary rewards. Understanding that you're part of a distribution. You're accumulating the distribution. So yes, the price could move quick actually, because there's so much that's been wrapped. It's like 8 billion something. There's only 12 billion on the circulating supply right now. Not financial advice. It was managed phenomenally because it was upgraded and enhanced far beyond its capabilities, which means the opportunity for us to be a part of that from the beginning is even bigger now because there's more use cases for FLR as collateral. Comments like this are common within the community at the moment. And this is what separates the perspective of those who have paid attention and are aware of the two powerful protocols that are embedded into the network. Like this post that I'm just going off of, that somebody's asking this question, not financial advice. They're totally oblivious to that. So they overlook that and say, well, there was this thing, F assets. Well, where was that? And then they jump to a conclusion that the project's mismanaged. It was managed phenomenally because it was upgraded and enhanced far beyond its capabilities. This was a question that was just asked. So, all right. So right now, rewards are given to people from the airdrops. If you delegate to the FTSO providers, that is utility. No sign of F assets. FTSO rewards are provided from inflating the supply. Utility is not driving anything. Correct. There's not utility driving anything. After years, you would expect more from this project. All right. So let me stop there. First, it's important to understand it's not a project and it's not a DApp. It's a layer 1 blockchain. So it's infrastructure. So calling things projects, I think are, sometimes when we use certain words, we have to be careful because I look at something like a project, it's just a small thing that's getting built on a network. That's a project. This is not a project. That would be like saying like building, a city is a project. It's an undertaking. And Flare has laid the foundation for the network. Now, they embedded these two protocols, which that's their job to build. Now, they laid out a specification for the F assets. And, there has been multiple changes. So if you haven't been around for a while, you'd be like, well, where's the F assets? That was supposed to launch with it. And it was part of the initial design. But since then, we know that they've expanded outward. And so this person writes, can you provide anything that would convince people like me to invest in the project other than rewards in the form of a token that is a huge inflationary circulating supply? So number one, the inflationary circulating supply thing, not sure what they're getting at there, but the total supply is the total supply. So right now what's being distributed, you have to look at it like it's part of the supply. So this is why price-wise, a lot of people over time are going to have difficulties. The price unlikely is going to shoot up when you have so much supply coming out, but you're receiving all of the supply, but that ends. That has a cutoff. It's not inflationary to where it just keeps going. Inflationary rewards come from the FTSO. And after 1 year, they go down to 7%. Then they go down to 5%. And I mean, we could vote to even lower that further if the price warrants it and there's a value there. But we don't have the utility to absorb the flare that's coming on the market right now. And why is that? So the two protocols that are implemented into Flare and Songbird, the FTSOs are there, right? They're producing price feeds. They're able to be used. But what's missing is the contracts are not aligned on Songbird because FIP01 changed the contracts, changed the distribution, everything, that Songbird had to be realigned with that. So that's right now, I believe, up for a vote. And it's a Songbird improvement proposal, which is very rare. You won't see many of those, is going to align the contracts. Once that happens, then you'll see dApps that can feel comfortable like, okay, we could launch on Costin, Songbird, and then to Flare. Before that, they didn't have the same contracts, like technically wise, for developers to build on Costin and Songbird and then go to Flare. Now they do, so hopefully we start to see an expansion there. But it was about a month or two ago, we said, even Pangolin said to in the Twitter spaces, don't expect major activity until we see the bridges and more things built on Flare and Songbird. Now, from an investment point perspective here, the way he's talking is that Flare's not appealing to the small investors when they talk. That's not who they're speaking to because they don't really need the small investors. Like, there is a large community. They need developers. We need applications. So they're marketing in a way right now to them. So for us, we just have to know what the goal here is and what they're trying to accomplish with what they built. Now, it's not just them, but there is a goal underlying the whole network, right? And what is that goal? To solve the data constraints and Oracle problem of the industry, bringing data in to allow a new wave of applications to take form in the next cycle here as we go through. So now's the time they're building all that backbone out. We see the API portal. We see that they did demonstrations with buying an NFT on Songbird, on Costin, with XRP. And that was all done from within the wallet, from Bifrost. That's a feat that's never been done before. So they kind of prioritized that first instead of like, let's get to TVL. Now, TVL has to come because that's what's going to swallow up this distribution coming out. And it will come. I don't have a time, but that is ultimately what will eat up a lot of this distribution. Because once people realize that the distribution comes out and now they can mint FXRP with that, and then you have the elephant in the room, which is the case. That settles, a mass amount of value is going to pour in, even if it's speculation, to Flare because people have both assets. And all the other assets, just speaking of how the case impacts things, all the typical coins that a lot of the XRP community own. If the case does clear, and I'm not going to say a specific way, let's just say it ends and XRP gets clarity, that value is going to proliferate outward. So that's just something to keep in mind. Not financial advice there, but it's going to flow into those type of assets, most likely. With these type of things, you're early to something that doesn't show on the surface why it's such a great investment, right? If it was such a great investment, then it'd be easy to point to him, hey, this, and this are happening right now. One thing I didn't like, and I didn't even really address it in there, was maybe I'm wrong, but it seems pretty poorly managed. I get it's not easy to follow, and there's a lot of moving pieces here, and there have been a lot of changes, but the end result has been, okay, we have this test network now that's live. You got a second token. Okay, it's not worth that much, but both are aligned now, and things are ready to go. The networks themselves have been run fine, but we're not managing anything. It's a network, so it kind of manages itself. So thinking of it like a centralized project is probably not the best way to look at it, because once the network's out there now, there's really nobody managing the actual project because we're not invested in a project that's managed by somebody. If the protocols work as they're supposed to, that's what it comes down to. Is it producing price feeds that could be used by dApps? That would be one check for FTSO. The reward distribution, that's a different story. We don't need to go there again, but that's separate from the actual use of the protocol. Now, the state connector, they're obviously shown it could be used. It could be used to buy NFTs from one network's assets onto Flare without having to come to that network. Now, a lot of people can say, well, what does that have to do with FLR? Well, it doesn't, but it creates an ecosystem
of different type of applications that could never be created before. So that's something that they're focusing on first, because if you could get the interest from these developers and to build new types of applications that solve real problems, because at the end of that presentation, he says, NFTs might just be digital art now and different things, but in the future, they'll be real world asset and other types of asset classes. And that's really big then, when you could use one asset to buy an asset on another network and do it seamlessly. So they're trying to build for the future. So it's not going to reflect in price right now. GPK, you have any thoughts on that you wanted to add?
Thanks for asking. Of course I do. To me, it's the lack of understanding. What I'm seeing in Twitter right now, I'm sure all you are, is, well, if it's not real, then it's just talk. That's kind of the general statement I'm seeing. And it makes me pause and think, like, well, what about Ethereum blockchain? What about what's not real on that and it's all talk? What about Bitcoin? What's real and it's all talk? You know, these things.
What do you mean by real?
Well, by real is functional, like they're expecting F assets. That's a good example. If F assets isn't coming out or it's not out yet, then it's not real. So it's just talk. Don't buy into hopium, right? And that's what I'm seeing the general negative side of comments are right now. And from my perspective, it's like, well, what technology, what are they doing to roll out? What's the Flare team giving us checkpoints on? State Connector was the most recent one, that demo that we watched, the NFT. They continue to deliver, you know, and looking at it from a TVL perspective, if you would just separate the difference between Songbird at the simplest stage, Songbird and Flare, what's the big difference between the two? There's two different mechanisms that cause this holding of tokens right now. And Songbird simply has FTSO providers, right? And so there's really no use for Songbird as of yet, except for that one aspect. But you have a pretty large participation rate, over 60%. On Songbird, people that are still believing in the network and not selling. When you add another mechanism to hold, which is simply a Flare drop, it's going to increase that. So we can expect Flare to be over 60% participation just for that simple aspect. You're lacing in different features. And now we have the State Connector protocol. If we see anything that comes to life that gets put out to the public, that changes the whole tone of everything, because now you just introduced a third mechanism, a third reason to be holding these tokens. So the point I'm trying to get at is they can pump out whatever narrative they want. If they're not in, you know, the trenches, digging and looking and seeing the status updates of what tech keeps getting rolled out with contracts, Mickey, you're doing a great job. Contracts are being updated. There's movement by the Flare team constantly, right? And I think there should be some more candle held to that. And there's not enough yet. And so patience is everything. You know, for me, from my perspective, I'm like, who's the underdog here? Songbird or Flare? Songbird is. What one has seen the biggest price smash for the longest time? Songbird. Which one's going to see the tech first? Songbird. I'm heavily into Flare, but I'm throwing little bits of pieces of non-financial advice at Songbird because it's seeing the biggest crash in it, right? But it's going to see the technology first. And because of that, both tokens will probably rise, but Songbird's on a penny, you know? And so these guys are just worn and torn because they're focused a lot of their negative energy on that Songbird. And now they're just kind of using that negative energy, in my opinion, for Flare, right?
Yeah.
What's
That's
the point?
interesting you talk about Songbird like that, though, because as I'm thinking about this, whenever a protocol, if it's X assets, F assets, that's dependent on those protocols. So it's not real, or, you know, just to speak on that, it's not real or not. It's real once the protocols are up. Anybody can build it. It's not theory. It doesn't need to be 10 months of building. What they don't understand on Twitter is how the protocol works, how the dApp would work. It uses those protocols. That's what makes it possible. Once those are fully stood up, then it will launch. But wouldn't it launch on Songbird first, is from what I've seen. So with that said, if it's going to be assumed a self-minting process first, you would need some Songbird to just test, right? And practice. Say, even if you've got $100 worth of Songbird, just to do that, that would create some kind of demand for SGB. Now, how that affects the price, I don't know, but it's definitely going to happen on Songbird first. There's no doubt in the short term. It shouldn't be that much longer, but I don't want to put a date on it.
So the way I'm always trying to opposite the crowd, right? I don't want to do what the mainstream crowd is. If the mainstream crowd tells me the Songbird price is constantly going down and I believe in what my money is in, I'm definitely going to do opposite of the crowd and cost average down, because the idea here is, in any good investment world, you always buy on the way down. You never buy on the way up. You oppose that and you sell while we're going up, right? It's really hard to be in that mindset because everyone's chasing that get rich dream. And I can tell you, just based on what I've seen from this team, it's delivering really good quality stuff. And, you know, part of this is they did a whole restructuring of these protocols so they're extendable to all blockchain. Like that, there's not enough weight to really show people that, right? You can't really justify that. But the demo we saw was not for just XRP or just Doge. It was for both networks. And that is kind of illustrating that point of how they refactored the code, how they rewrote the code to make it work so it's abstract enough to work for any blockchain. People aren't seeing those pieces yet, but they will as soon as a dApp comes out that uses it, that shows us that dApp can be used and built in a completely different way, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you hit it on the money. That's exactly what I think is needed.
Anyways, there's my 2 cents. If it's helpful, great. If it's not, it's kind of my position. I'm not giving up on Songbird. I know a lot of people have, but it's under a penny. I mean, it's cheap. It's easy to just scoop up 10,000 at a time. You know, I'm a digits guy. All about how many zeros behind the one. That's
well, it is an interesting thought to think of. Well, as you get your FlareDrops with SGB down, would you allocate any towards grabbing SGB while it comes in? Because we need to look at these drops as, okay, maybe it's not as meaningful right now, right? It's the price is still low, this is that. But in the future, we're going to be into the next cycle. People are going to be more interested in getting that distribution. Now, how would you allocate it if it was a considerable amount more money into things that are like the test network? And would you have bought that earlier? So it's just something to think about without having to pull money out of your pocket, right? So nobody's pulling money, has to pull out of their pocket to use the FlareDrops. And hopefully in the future, it's used for collateral. The idea is to take that asset and then earn with that asset. And that's when everything changes, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And yes, I am doing those things. I looked at my FlareDrop and said, well, that's great. I want to keep proportionate allocation to the network, but at the same time, I don't want to miss the opportunity in Songbird because I see future strategies that I want to do. I coined a strategy called teeter-totter strategy, where I can move, I track the ratio between the networks and I can move stuff in between, right? And try to continue to build up my Flare stack that way. So I'm trying to think long-term from my perspective of every little bit, every little way of, you don't need new capital. Once you have capital in these markets, you know, your mind gets away from your national currency as much as just trying to accumulate. And that's the phase we're in, accumulation, right? Sit back, wait, accumulate, and learn, right? So that's where mine is. Mickey, you asked, did I pick up some Songbird? Yep.
Yeah, well, now, I mean, what about what happens when the announcement comes out that whoever it is going to be issuing or allowing it's not even that they're going to be issuing it, that they'll be opening up the issuance for S assets on Songbird. But you could only create these S assets if you have SGB. Now, anyone who even wants to test who doesn't have Songbird and is on Flare is going to need to go to the market and buy Songbird. So that's just something to keep in mind. I don't know how that's going to impact price, but even if it's everybody has to buy $100 just to test, because everyone's going to want to try to do it. And I think it will be limited, but let's just go back to F assets for a second. F assets was a spec that the Flare team created, which had a collateral system and included entities called agents. Now, that's one way that you could create assets issued trustlessly onto Flare, but it's not the only way. So that's why he talked about this self-mint component, which would be just you doing it on your own. Like there's nobody, when they talk about real and this, there's really nobody who has to, it's just you doing it. Now, who creates the front end that's built in a Bifrost that allows that to happen, that creates the smart contract that's a vault that auto liquidates? Like that would need to be stood up, but that's not that difficult going forward. And I truly believe Probity is the real thing that's built purposely for Flare, and it's built with the equity component and it's built with the collateral component, which means that you can issue assets on Flare, but then take F assets and then use those in collateral. Probity is built hands down for that. It's open sourced, it's done, it's there, you could go look at it. It's audited and anybody could use it. Anyone could configure it in any way possible. It has one core module that can't be changed. That's the vault module in the middle. Everything else is configurable. So anyone could take that and configure it in any way they want and make totally different apps out of it. And I can't see how somebody's not doing that. I mean, it's just, Link2 is doing their thing with it. That's something just to say, because they did purchase Trustline, which was the entity who was building out Probity, but they're not, because they were trying to do it in the US and it hit regulatory regulations with the SEC. But it doesn't matter, whoever else builds that out of the country, it's an open protocol. So anybody can do that going forward. We just don't know who that's going to be. It's obviously not the Flare team. They've stated that they're not doing that. Now, they are in Dubai, so they technically have clear rules of the road for them, but they seem to be more focused on the layer cake and the insurance component, which seems to be the bigger prize at the end of the day, but it's not for us on the short term. The prize for us on the short term is the idea of F assets or X assets, because it locks up Flare, and then it gives people with XRP something to do with their XRP, and that's something that's missing. So once that does happen, I think it will have this flywheel effect, because you have two entities. You have people who have XRP who are looking for something to do with it, a yield. We got people making videos saying Polyson's going to lend us, earn yield from them. They're so desperate to earn yield, there's nothing there that could be done with it. So once that happens, and people here, they could earn FLR just by minting FXRP or whatever they call it. It's going to still earn from that incentive pool, no matter how it's created. If it's created by yourself in a self-mint, or it's through something like a big application like Probity that tries to take on Aave, and it's the center of some multi-chain network and it's a lending protocol. We don't know. I mean, that's what I would think, because that's built to work with the EVM sidechain on the XRP ledger. It's built to work with ETH, and it's built to work with Flare. But it's specifically built to work with Flare because it integrates the FTSO and the rewards and the distribution. So your vault would automatically earn the FlareDrops, and it would also be able to earn the FTSO rewards. And it's built into the protocol like that. So I thought that was really interesting with Probity. Well, what's the source of these things that are being built? People are saying they're coming, they're noise, oh, it's not real, but let's look to what makes them real. And are they real? Well, they're real if these two protocols are stood up. Once those protocols are there, they can be created. So anybody then can create them. Like, it doesn't take Flare to do that. Now, those protocols need to be fully stood up. So that's kind of the answer, and I think, but to know that, you first have to know that there's these two protocols. If you just heard that there's these protocols, okay, they're there, they do this and that, I could delegate, but don't really know what they really do, you would think, oh, well, this is something they're telling us, we don't know if it's true or not. And then you'd be hesitant to believe it because you've been lied to so much by other things in society that I do think it impacts all of us, because of how do you really get to the truth? Now, I can't put a time frame, like GPK said, on when the F assets will go live, but we know what it takes for that system to launch. So knowing that, then you got to make your decisions on how invested you're in this. So nobody could tell somebody how to invest it, but there's no institutions that have more knowledge than we do. You could even go to the Explorer and look on Costin and see if they're testing certain things. And I think that's why Flare had to step back, and that's why they're not earning the distribution. That's why they didn't vote in the FIP01. So they're doing all the right things to keep the network in line with this progressive decentralization. There's some things that still need to happen, when it comes to the FTSOs and things that are getting there. But it's a progressive process. To expect it to just be, boom, we launched this thing in the bear market and it's going to be, the greatest thing in crypto ever. They're going to play with the whole ecosystem. Like, they didn't make it obviously a priority to align the networks. It was more of a priority to get the distribution going, to get the community involved. Now that the community is all involved, I think now is the next thing is to focus on is aligning the networks. And then in the meantime, give out all these grants to these developers. They're giving grants out, so somebody's building in the back.
So I don't want to lose sight of like disruptive applications. We have what's called disruptive blockchains, but we also have disruptive applications. And one that really comes to my mind it's just still there today is Napster, right? Napster was a big fundamental change for the music industry. That's one industry. If we have one DApp that can be as disruptive as Napster with all those other things lined up, and I'm not saying that everyone, oh, I've got to go do that one thing, whatever it may be. It's once you have one of those disruptive apps created, it doesn't take much time. Then you have another, and then you have another. And in the process of all that, everything's kind of accelerating as far as like more and more traditional institutions are allowing crypto purchases. Better wallets or better enhancements of wallets are happening, making it much easier to do it. These are all kind of jointed together at the hip, allowing that space to just kind of flourish, this space, I should say. So yes, applications are really where it's going to drive a lot of it, but you have to have all these other elements in place so people can easily get to those new experiences of disruptive experiences.
And data will fuel value as we see more value come on with tokenization and real world assets. It's about interoperability, but it's more than that. It's about this data.
Data will fuel value.